boss stormed in and ended the fight in seconds. The sound of his hand striking her face cracked through the diner like a snapped branch, leaving the new waitress unconscious on the tile, while the entire room froze in terrified silence. The attacker stood over her, triumphant and arrogant, completely unaware that the front door was opening for the one man in the city who doesn't believe in second chances. As the Mafia boss steps into the room and sees the blood, he doesn't ask for an explanation. He closes the distance in silence to deliver a judgment that will change the rules of this diner forever. Stay until the end, because this story will grip you before you're watching from. You don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get into it. Rio Ano's diner at dusk. Lights came on gradually, soft and yellow, washing over checkered floor and red leather booths. Outside, street hummed with traffic. Inside, time slowed. Plates clinked, coffee poured, air smelled of grilled onions and old wood. This place had seen decades without changing its face. It had rules nobody spoke aloud. You came in, ate, paid, and whatever kind of person you were beyond those doors stayed there. That unspoken agreement was why Rio Ano's survived so long. Clara Benson didn't know any of that when she stepped behind the counter for the late shift. She only knew her feet already ached, and she'd been here less than a week. She tied her apron carefully, smoothing the yellow fabric with both hands. The uniform didn't quite feel like hers yet. Nothing did. New places never did. She moved carefully between tables, memorizing patterns. Who needed refills, who wanted to be left alone, who spoke too loudly. She learned quickly. She had to. Her voice stayed soft, her smile polite but distant. She didn't linger, didn't invite conversation. Most customers barely noticed her at all. That suited her just fine. The regulars noticed anyway. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. They noticed the way she listened more than spoke, the way her eyes stayed lowered but never unfocused. They noticed she didn't laugh at jokes meant to test her and didn't flinch when voices rose. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Control, maybe. Or practice. Near the back, a man sat alone in a booth. His arm stretched across the vinyl seat, fingers drumming lazily. He'd been there when Clara arrived and hadn't moved since. His dark shirt blended into shadows, but his attention didn't waver. Each time Clara passed, his eyes followed. Sharp and unashamed, he watched the way she carried herself, the way she avoided eye contact without seeming small. Men like him noticed details. Men like him expect his coffee. Casual, almost friendly, delivered with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. She answered professionally, set the mug down, moved on. Sarah paused just long enough to acknowledge him, then stepped away. A few patrons glanced over their shoulders. Someone at the counter shifted uncomfortably. No one said anything. Rio Ano's wasn't a place where people stepped in. Clara felt the shift in the room, even if she didn't look back. The air changed, thickened like a hell breath. She kept moving, tray balanced against her palm, pulse steady. She'd learned long ago that responding to the wrong kind of attention was an invitation. Silence was safer. Behind her, the man's smile thinned. He stood slowly, chair scraping just enough to be noticed. Conversation dipped, then resumed in quieter tones. Clara reached the counter and set down a plate. Her reflection faint in the metal surface. For a brief moment, she considered asking for help, calling the manager, but she dismissed the thought just as quickly. She didn't want trouble. Trouble had a way of growing teeth. "Hey," the man said, his voice closer now. Clara turned. She met his eyes for the first time. Calm, neutral. "Yes, sir." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or irritation. He hadn't expected her to look at him like that. Like she wasn't impressed or afraid or interested. He leaned closer, invading her space, his voice dropping just enough to make it personal. Clara listened, her expression unchanged. "I hear you," she said quietly when he finished. "But I need to get back to my tables." For a split second, the diner was silent. The man stared at her, jaw tight, then laughed once, sharp and humorless. He stepped aside, gesturing with exaggerated politeness. Clara walked past him, her shoulders square, her steps even. Behind her, the man watched, and something in his eyes hardened. By the time Clara reached the far end of the diner, The sound of the door opening cut through the low murmur of voices. A few heads turned instinctively. The man from the booth straightened, his attention snapping away from Clara. Someone else had entered. He moved fast, not rushed, as if the room had already made space for him. Black suit, no tie, shirt open at the collar. Tattoos visible against his skin like quiet warnings. His hair was neatly styled, untouched by chaos he was walking into. His expression was cold, focused, unreadable. Stefano Davide took in the room in a single glance. He saw the tension, the way people avoided looking at the man standing too close to the waitress. He saw the slight tremor in the air, the rules bending under pressure. His jaw tightened, but he didn't slow. The man near Clara noticed him. Then recognition hit like a wave. Color drained from his face as Stefano closed the distance. Each step deliberate. The diner parted without a word. Even the walls seemed to listen. Stefano stopped just behind him. "Move," he said calmly. The man didn't. The tension in the room reached breaking point. But instead of backing down, the man grew bolder. He turned his attention back to Clara with renewed aggression. He reached out, not suddenly, but deliberately, and took hold of her wrist. Gasps rippled through the diner. Clara froze, not in fear, but in calculation. She knew this moment, knew the cost of pulling away too fast, of escalating too visibly. She met his eyes. "Steady. Let go," she said. He leaned in, his grip tightening just enough to hurt. "You don't tell me what to do." No one moved. That was when Clara understood fully. Not just that he could hurt her, but that he believed he could do it without consequence. The room had already decided. Silence had chosen a side. She twisted her wrist sharply and stepped back, breaking free. It wasn't graceful, but it was enough. "I'm asking you to leave," she said again. Louder now. The man's face darkened. Wrong answer. What happened next unfolded too fast for anyone to stop it. His hand came up, not wild or frantic, but controlled, calculated. The sound cracked through the diner like a snap branch. Clara felt the impact before she felt pain. A flash of white filled her vision as the world tilted violently to one side. She stumbled, her feet failing to catch her weight, and then the floor rushed up to meet her. The room exploded into noise. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped back. A glass shattered. Clara hit the tile hard, her head ringing, the ceiling spinning above her. She tried to breathe, but air felt thick, distant. She tasted blood. The lights blurred into streaks of yellow and white. She heard footsteps approaching. The man loomed over her, his shadow swallowing the light. She could see his mouth moving, words spilling out that she couldn't make sense of. He looked triumphant, satisfied, control restored. The fear in the room was almost physical now. People stood frozen, trapped between shock and instinct. No one stepped forward. No one reached for her. Clara tried to move. Her body didn't respond. That was when the door opened. The sound cut through everything. Clean, sharp, undeniable. The man above her stiffened. A few heads turned slowly, as if afraid of what they might see. Footsteps crossed the diner, fast but measured. Stefano Davide entered the room like a decision already made. He took in the scene in a single glance. Clara on the floor, blood at her temple. The man standing over her as if claiming victory. His expression didn't change. Not anger, not surprise, just focus. He walked straight toward them. The room parted instinctively, bodies shifting out of his path without conscious thought. The man noticed him then, recognition flashing across his face like fear finally catching up. Stefano stopped just behind him. "Enough," he said quietly. The word carried weight. Finality. The man turned halfway, defiance flickering in his eyes. "This doesn't concern." He never finished the sentence. Stefano moved. One precise motion. Efficient. Unmistakable. The man collapsed, the sound of his body hitting the floor swallowed by the silence that followed. Stefano knelt beside Clara immediately, his hand hovering near her shoulder, careful not to startle her if she could still hear. He checked her pulse, his jaw tightening just slightly. "She's alive," he said. "Call for help." Only then did the diner breathe again. For a moment after the man hit the floor, no one spoke. The diner held its breath. Clara lay on the tile, the world drifting in and out around her. Sounds muffled as if she were underwater. Somewhere close, she felt a presence, steady and grounded, shielding her from the chaos that should have followed, but didn't. The fear in the room had turned thick, almost solid, pressing in from every direction. People stood frozen where they were. Hands hovered midair. Conversations died on tongues. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim as if Rio Annos itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The man who had struck her groaned softly from the floor. The sound snapped something loose. Chairs scraped back. Someone finally shouted for an ambulance. Another voice followed. Louder, panicked, overlapping words tumbling out too fast to understand. But still no one rushed toward Clara. They looked at her, at the blood, at the stillness of her body. And then they looked at Stefano. He remained kneeling beside her, one knee on the tile, his attention fixed entirely on her breathing. He spoke quietly to someone behind him, giving instructions without urgency, as if calm itself were a tool. People responded immediately, scrambling to do exactly what he said. It struck Clara dimly, even through the haze. How quickly the room obeyed him. Not because he demanded it, because they were afraid not to. A hand brushed her arm, careful and tentative. Someone dabbed at the blood near her temple. The touch was gentle, but it carried something heavier than concern. Guilt, maybe. Clara wanted to tell them it was all right, that she understood. That fear made people small, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate, and the effort slipped away from her. She heard someone crying openly now. A woman near the counter sobbed into her hands, whispering over and over that she should have said something. A man near the door stared at the floor, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. They had all seen it coming. They had all chosen silence. Stefano shifted slightly, blocking Clara from view as paramedics pushed through the crowd. The doors swung open, letting in a rush of cold night air that smelled of rain and asphalt. Red and blue lights flashed against the diner windows, painting the walls in uneasy color. "She's stable," one of the medics said after a brief assessment. But she took a hard hit. Stefano nodded once. "Take her." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Clara felt the motion tug her back toward consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to catch a glimpse of the room she had just left. Faces pale, shaken, no longer sure of their place in it. As the stretcher rolled toward the door, Clara's gaze drifted past the tables, past the counter, until it found the spot where the man had first stood over her. The space felt empty now, stripped of whatever authority it once held. Outside, the night swallowed her. Inside the diner, the silence lingered. The man lay on the floor where he had fallen, restrained now. His earlier confidence reduced to shallow breaths and averted eyes. He didn't look dangerous anymore. He looked small. People avoided looking at him, not out of fear, but out of something closer to shame. Stefano rose to his feet slowly. When he turned to face the room, every pair of eyes snapped to him. No one needed to be told to pay attention. "This place survives because it stays neutral," he said calmly. His voice carried without effort. But neutrality is not the same as permission. No one argued. He gestured toward the man on the floor. What he did was not power. It was weakness, and weakness that harms others has consequences. The words settled deep, heavy and final. Someone near the door nodded. Another wiped their face. The diner had learned something tonight, whether it wanted to or not. By the time the police arrived, the story had already solidified in the room's collective memory. Details would change later. Names would blur, but the moment would remain clear. The sound of the strike, the stillness that followed, and the way one man's presence had turned fear back on itself. Afterward, Rio Annos closed early. The chairs were stacked, the counter wiped down in silence. The smell of disinfectant replaced coffee and grease. Staff moved carefully, speaking in low voices, as if loud sounds might shatter something fragile. When the last light was switched off, the diner stood empty, its familiar warmth replaced by a hollow quiet. Outside, the street returned to normal, traffic flowing past without pause. But inside those walls, something had changed. People would talk about that night for years. About the waitress who didn't fight back and the room that didn't step in. About the man who did. And about the cost of looking away when it mattered most. For Clara, lying in the ambulance as it carried her through the city, the night replayed itself in fragments. The silence, the blow, the faces, and finally the calm voice that had cut through everything else. She didn't know yet why he had come or what it meant that he had. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The rules of Rio Ano's diner were no longer what they had been, and neither was she. Clara drifted in and out of awareness to the sound of voices layered over one another, sharp and distant at the same time. Someone was crying. Someone else kept repeating her name. The smell of coffee was still there, stubbornly familiar, mixed now with metal and antiseptic. When she finally opened her eyes fully, the ceiling lights of a hospital room blurred above her. She tried to move. Pain flared behind her eyes, bright and immediate, forcing a gasp from her chest. Easy, a voice said nearby. Calm, steady, not rushed. Don't try to sit up yet. Clara blinked again, her vision slowly sharpening. A nurse stood beside the bed, checking monitors, adjusting a line. She glanced at Clara with practiced concern. You're awake. That's good. Doctor will be in soon. Clara swallowed. Her throat felt dry. How long? About 4 hours since they brought you in. You have a concussion, some bruising, but you'll recover. The nurse left quietly, and Clara was alone with the steady beeping of machines. She stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened after she hit the floor. The memories came in flashes. Stefano's face, the man collapsing, the paramedics, the lights. A soft knock at the door pulled her attention. She expected the doctor. Instead, Stefano Davide stepped into the room. Black suit still immaculate, expression still controlled. But his eyes held something different now. Concern maybe, or assessment. He didn't ask permission to enter. He simply walked to the chair beside her bed and sat down, his movements deliberate and unhurried. You're awake, he said. Not a question, a statement. Clara studied him through the haze of medication and exhaustion. You stayed. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm alive. That's something. Stefano's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It shouldn't have happened. But it did. Clara's voice was quiet but firm, and everyone saw it coming. He didn't deny it. Yes, they did. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but heavy with things neither had said yet. The man, Clara asked finally, in custody. He won't hurt anyone again. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing that. And the diner? Closed for the night. It'll open again tomorrow. Stefano leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. But it won't be the same. Good, Clara said. The word surprised even her. But it was true. Stefano studied her face carefully. You should take time. Rest. Heal. I will. But then I'm going back. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Most people wouldn't. I'm not most people. A faint smile touched his lips. Brief. Restrained. No, you're not. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her. When she opened them again, Stefano was still there. Watching. Waiting. Why were you there? She asked. At the diner. Right when it happened. Stefano was quiet for a moment, weighing his answer. Because Rio Ano's matters. And because I'd been watching. Watching what? The patterns. The people who think neutrality means they can do whatever they want. His voice was calm, but edged with something harder. I was waiting to see who would expose themselves. Clara's breath caught. You knew something would happen. I suspected. I didn't know it would be you. The truth settled over her like a weight. She hadn't been random. She'd been visible in a place where people came to hide. And that visibility had made her a target. You could have warned me, she said quietly. Would you have listened? Clara thought about that. About the way she'd learned to survive by staying quiet, by not making waves. Probably not. Stefano nodded. People don't change until they have to. You had to. And now you know what you're capable of. Clara turned her head to look at him fully. What am I capable of? Surviving what most people run from, and coming back anyway. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Clara wasn't sure she fully understood yet. A nurse entered quietly, checking Clara's vitals, making notes. When she left, Stefano stood. Rest, he said. When you're ready to return, Rio Annos will be waiting. He moved toward the door, then paused. Without turning back, he spoke again. What happened tonight changed things. People are afraid now. But fear is only useful if it teaches the right lesson. What lesson is that? Clara asked. Stefano looked back at her, his expression unreadable. That silence has a price. And tonight everyone paid it. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling as the machines beeped their steady rhythm. Her body ached. Her head throbbed, but something else stirred inside her. Something she hadn't felt in years. Resolve. She wasn't going to disappear. She wasn't going to let fear win. She was going back to Rio Annos. And when she did, she would make sure the lesson stuck. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic flowed. Lights blinked. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But inside that hospital room, Clara Benson had changed. And Rio Annos' diner would never be the same again. 2 days later, Clara returned to Rio Annos. The story had already grown teeth by then. She heard it in pieces before she ever stepped back inside. A butcher down the block spoke of it in a low voice, shaking his head. A neighbor mentioned it in passing, careful not to linger on details. Everyone used the same phrases, ended it in seconds, didn't raise his voice, didn't have to. No one said the name out loud. Rio Annos looked unchanged from the outside. Same windows, same sign humming softly above the door. But when Clara pushed it open, she felt the difference immediately. The air was heavier, as if the room remembered what had happened and was waiting to see what she would do next. She stepped inside anyway. Conversations dipped, then resumed, softer than before. Heads turned. Some people offered small nods of acknowledgement. Others avoided her eyes altogether. Clara walked to the counter and set down her bag, her movements calm and deliberate. The faint scar near her temple pulled slightly when she frowned, but she ignored it. The diner wasn't full yet. Early evening, that in-between hour when regulars trickled in before the rush. Clara poured herself a glass of water and took a slow sip, grounding herself in the familiar routine. The door opened again. This time, the reaction was immediate. Voices stopped mid-sentence. Chairs stilled. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade beneath the sudden awareness that swept the room. Clara didn't need to turn to know who it was. Stefano Davide entered Rio Annos the same way he had before. Without hesitation, without announcement. Black suit, no tie, shirt open at the collar. Tattoos visible against his skin like warnings written in ink. His hair was perfectly in place. His expression cold and focused, as if emotion were a luxury he chose not to indulge. He scanned the room once, efficiently. Then his eyes found Clara. She felt the weight of his attention settle on her. Steady and unyielding. Not possessive, not intrusive. Observant. Stefano walked toward the counter, his pace brisk but unhurried. The room parted for him instinctively, people shifting aside without realizing they were doing it. He stopped a few feet from Clara and studied her face carefully. You shouldn't be back yet, he said. I'm fine, Clara replied, her voice even, though her pulse quickened. I don't like unfinished things. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Neither do I. They stood there for a moment, the space between them charged but quiet. Around them, Rio Annos held its breath. You saved my life, Clara said finally. Stefano shook his head once. I stopped something that shouldn't have happened. That's the same thing. He didn't argue. Instead, he glanced around the diner, taking in the people watching them, the careful distance they kept. This place relies on people pretending not to see, he said calmly. That only works until someone decides it doesn't. Clara followed his gaze. They were scared. Yes, Stefano agreed. And fear makes people predictable. He turned back to her. You weren't. The words landed heavier than praise. Clara folded her hands together, steadying them. You came quickly. I was already on my way, he replied. That answer raised more questions than it settled. Clara studied his face, searching for cracks. for anything that might reveal more than he intended. There was nothing, just control, honed and absolute. Why? She asked quietly. Stefano's eyes flicked briefly toward the back of the diner, where the shadows gathered between booths. Because Rio Anos is important, and because people who mistake silence for weakness tend to make mistakes. Clara nodded slowly. She understood that language. A waitress approached hesitantly, holding a coffee pot. Can I get you something? Stefano shook his head without looking away from Clara. The waitress retreated at once. You're being watched now, he said, whether you want it or not. I already was, Clara replied. That earned her a longer look. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Assessment, perhaps, or respect. Stefano reached into his jacket and placed a folded card on the counter. He didn't slide it toward her. He simply set it down. Precise. If anyone gives you trouble, he said, you call the number on that card. And if I don't, Clara asked, then I'll know, he said calmly. The statement wasn't a threat. It was a fact. For a moment, Clara considered pushing back, testing the boundaries of his authority the way others had tested hers. But she didn't. She recognized restraint when she saw it. You didn't have to do what you did, she said instead. Stefano met her gaze. Yes, I did. Silence settled between them again. Heavier this time, layered with understanding neither of them spoke aloud. Then, without ceremony, Stefano turned and walked toward the door. As it closed behind him, the diner exhaled as one. Conversations resumed slowly. Someone laughed too loudly, then fell quiet. Life at Rio Anos crept back toward normal. But it wasn't the same normal it had been before. Clara picked up the card and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't look at it yet. She didn't need to. She wiped down the counter, her movements smooth and practiced, her posture steady. The rest of the shift passed without incident. But Clara noticed the differences. The way men spoke more carefully around her now. The way women nodded with something that looked like solidarity. The way the entire diner seemed to breathe differently. Near closing time, an older man approached the counter, one of the regulars who'd been there that night. He'd sat 3 booths away and watched everything happen without moving. Miss, he said quietly, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not helping. Clara met his eyes, saw the genuine regret there. Thank you for saying that. He nodded, paid his bill, and left. 3 more people apologized before the night was over, each one quieter than the last, each one carrying the weight of their inaction like stones in their pockets. Clara accepted each apology with the same calm grace. She didn't forgive out loud, but she didn't condemn either. She simply acknowledged the truth. They had failed her, and they knew it. When the last customer left and Clara locked the door, she stood in the empty diner for a moment. The lights were low, the chairs stacked on tables, the floor gleaming from a fresh mop. She touched the scar near her temple. It didn't hurt anymore, just pulled slightly when she moved certain ways. A reminder that would fade, but never fully disappear. The manager emerged from the back. You did good tonight. Thank you. You know, he said carefully, you don't have to prove anything. You could take more time if you need it. Clara shook her head. This is where I need to be. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, see you tomorrow then. As Clara stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around her. The street was quiet. A few cars passed. Distant sirens wailed somewhere in the city. She pulled out the card Stefano had given her, looked at it under the streetlight. A phone number, nothing else. No name, no explanation. She memorized the number, then tucked the card back into her pocket. Clara started walking, her steps steady and sure. The city moved around her, indifferent and alive. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She'd been seen, been hurt, been saved, and she'd come back. That meant something, not just to her, but to everyone who'd been in that diner. To everyone who'd chosen silence and then watched what silence cost. As she turned the corner toward home, Clara made a decision. She would stay at Rio Anos. She would keep serving coffee and taking orders and moving through that space with the same quiet dignity she always had. But now, she would do it with her eyes open, with the knowledge that neutrality was a choice, and silence had a price. And if anyone ever tried what that man had tried again, she wouldn't wait for someone to save her. She would save herself. And if she couldn't, she knew exactly who to call. The next night at Rio Anno's began quietly, almost deceptively so. The diner filled the way it always did. Slow at first, then steadily. Voices layering over one another until the room hummed with familiarity. Clara moved through it with practiced ease, her body remembering what her mind still questioned. Each step felt measured, intentional. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. People watch her more openly now. Some smiled. Some looked away. A few seemed to study her, as if trying to understand what kind of person comes back to the place where they were hurt and stands upright behind the counter like nothing had happened. Clara felt their eyes, but she didn't let them change her pace. She poured coffee, took orders, wiped down the counter. She kept her voice even. Then she felt it, that subtle tightening in her chest. The sensation she'd learned to trust long before words ever caught up to it. Someone new had entered. She didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. The shift in the room told her everything. Conversations dipped just enough to be noticeable. Chairs stopped scraping. The air grew heavier, like a storm gathering, but refusing to break. He stood near the doorway, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, as if cataloging faces, exits, reactions. When his gaze landed on Clara, it didn't soften. It sharpened. He took a step forward, then another. Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her hand steady. She reminded herself of what she knew. People like this thrived on response, on fear, on spectacle. She wouldn't give him that. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the room. She didn't answer right away. She finished placing a plate on a table, thanked the customer quietly, and turned. "Yes." The man smiled, not thin or mocking this time. Confident, possessive. "Didn't think you'd be back," he said loud enough for others to hear. Most people learn. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. No one intervened. "I work here," Clara replied. Her voice didn't rise. "Can I get you something?" He laughed, shaking his head slowly. Still polite. "I like that." He moved closer, closing the space between them in a way that felt intentional. Rehearsed. This wasn't rage. It was performance. Clara saw it clearly now. He wanted the room, wanted eyes on him, wanted her diminished in front of witnesses. She took a small step back, enough to breathe. "Sir," she said quietly, "you need to sit down or leave." The laughter stopped. The room went silent. The man stared at her as if she had spoken a language he didn't expect. His jaw tightened, the smile fading into something colder. He reached out, not suddenly, but deliberately, and took hold of her wrist. Gasps rippled through the diner. Claire didn't freeze this time. She looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. Her voice was calm, clear. "Let go. Make me," he said, grip tightening. That was when the door opened. The sound was different this time. Heavier, more deliberate, like thunder before lightning. The man's grip loosened slightly. His eyes darted toward the entrance. Stefano Davidi stood in the doorway. Black suit, expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with something cold and absolute. He didn't announce himself, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward, and the room parted like water. The man released Clara's wrist immediately, took a step back, then another. Stefano stopped between them. He didn't look at Clara. His entire focus was on the man who'd just made a very serious mistake. "She asked you to leave," Stefano said calmly. The man's bravado crumbled visibly. I don't care." Stefano's voice was quiet but absolute. "You're done." The man looked between them, saw no escape route, no mercy in Stefano's eyes, no forgiveness in the room. He backed toward the door, trying to salvage some dignity. "This isn't over." "Yes," Stefano replied. "It is." The man left, the door closing behind him with a soft chime that sounded louder than it should have. The room exhaled collectively. Stefano turned to Clara. His expression softened just slightly. "You handled that well." "So did you," she replied. "You didn't need me this time." He glanced around the room. They saw that. Clara followed his gaze. People were watching her differently now, not with pity or fear, but with something closer to respect. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. People spoke more carefully, treated the staff with genuine respect. The invisible rules had changed. Rio Ano's neutrality now meant accountability, not silence. Weeks passed. The diner found its new rhythm. Some old faces disappeared for good, choosing distance over accountability. New customers arrived, drawn by the reputation of fairness. Clara became a fixture, not a victim, but a survivor who returned stronger. Stefano came occasionally, never predictably. Sometimes he sat at the counter, coffee untouched, watching the room with quiet focus. Other times he took a booth, speaking in low tones to men who arrived alone and left quickly. He never announced himself, yet the room adjusted when he entered. Power didn't need noise. Clara and Stefano rarely spoke at length. They didn't need to. Their understanding lived in small exchanges. Brief glances, raised eyebrows, shared pauses, built on awareness, not promises. One evening, a young couple came in just before closing. They slid into a booth near the window, laughing softly, unaware of the history layered into the space around them. Clara took their order and returned with their food. She listened as they spoke about plans and possibilities, their voices unguarded. As she walked away, she caught Stefano watching them from his usual spot at the counter. "They don't know," she said quietly as she passed. "No," he replied. "That's the point." Late that night, as Clara wiped down the counter, a man she didn't recognize lingered near the door. He hesitated, then approached cautiously. "I heard about you," he said. "About what happened?" Clara met his gaze evenly. "What about it?" He swallowed. "I just wanted to say it mattered that you came back." She nodded once. It mattered that people noticed. He left without another word. When closing time came, Clara stepped outside into the cool night air. She locked the door behind her and stood for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into Rio Ano's for the first time. That girl hadn't known what neutrality cost. She did now. Stefano joined her a moment later, adjusting his jacket as he looked down the street. "You've changed this place," he said. "So have you." He shook his head slightly. "I enforced something. You embodied it." They stood side by side in silence, the city breathing around them. "What will people remember?" Clara asked eventually. Stefano watched a car pass, its headlights briefly illuminating the street before fading into darkness. "They'll remember the moment fear changed direction," he said. "They'll remember that silence isn't the same as peace. And they'll remember that kindness mistaken for weakness carries consequences." Clara nodded. That was enough. As they parted ways, she glanced back at Rio Ano's one last time. The lights were off now, the diner resting until morning. But she could almost feel it watching her in return. No longer neutral, no longer blind. People would keep telling the story. They would change it, polish it, exaggerate it. But at its core, it would remain the same. A waitress was knocked to the floor. No one moved. And then someone did. That was what people remembered. And that was what endured. By morning, Rio Ano's diner looked exactly the way it always had. The windows were clean. The checkered floor gleamed. The counter smelled of fresh coffee. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't felt the way the room froze, you might have believed nothing had happened at all. But people remembered. They remembered the sound first, the crack of impact. They remembered the silence afterward. And most of all, they remembered the moment the door opened and a man in a black suit walked in as if the room already belonged to him. Stories spread the way they always do. Details blurred. Names were whispered. But the meaning was simple. Something had shifted. Clara heard this without interrupting, without correcting. The truth lived somewhere between all of it. And the truth was this. Rio Ano's had survived because people agreed to certain rules. But those rules had protected the wrong people for too long. Now the rules were different. Silence no longer protected cruelty. It exposed it. And Clara Benson, the quiet waitress with a scar near her temple, had become the living reminder of what happened when people finally chose to see. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick excited to see your thoughts and connect with you. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.